occasionally something comes along that proves to be an interesting opportunity to take a product intended for one use and turn it into something else. In this case, the Lenovo ThinkSmart View, a product that was designed for one purpose: video conferencing, and even then, limited to only Microsoft Teams or Zoom depending on the version. Now, what if I told you this product was sold at launch by Lenovo for $350 US? If you weren't the intended audience, it's a tough sell, no doubt about it. Fast forward a few years later,
one eternity later,
and the product is on a massive fire sale since it's clear the product didn't do well, to no one's surprise, and there's a lot of unsold inventory, which is why we are here today. The Lenovo ThinkSmart View is now available for around $25 to $40 US depending on where you shop, so places like eBay and Amazon are good spots to look for this overstock of inventory. But what's so interesting about this ThinkSmart View? Well, as the saying goes, there's more to the View than meets the eye. The View is an Android Things based device, which could possibly be another reason for its failure, as like many other projects, Google killed Android Things, which essentially was a stripped down variant of Android OS intended to run on Internet of Things or IoT devices. But under the hood, the View is powered by a fairly capable Qualcomm Snapdragon 624, which is essentially the same as the Snapdragon 625, just with a lower clock speed. It features 8 Cortex-A53 cores with clock speeds at 1.8 GHz and Adreno 506 graphics. It's certainly more than capable to handle beyond its intended use case, and on a fairly cold Saturday morning in Arizona, a message popped up from Discord member Ghosty, who like a messiah led me on the right path and shared with me this pretty interesting find. Ghosty, along with many others, have discovered the potential of the ThinkSmart View. In fact, a quick Google search will lead you to results from XDA, who have already been working with this for some time. The device is also popular in the home automation spaces, and there's an equally devoted group working with this device over at Home Automation, gearing it to their needs, equally realizing its potential beyond just a Teams conferencing device. It's been really fun exploring how other spaces have embraced the ThinkSmart View. And surprisingly, this is a very capable device when it comes to playing back media. The ThinkSmart View has an 8-inch IPS touchscreen display with a 1280 by 800 resolution, and sure, it won't blow anyone away with its pixel density, but it's still a fairly good-looking panel. It gets very bright and dims down really well. Look at it this way, I'd rather have this sitting on my desk as a digital picture frame than some of the junk that Walmart sells for more money. You are getting a high-quality, Lenovo-made product, and it's very apparent. The device is quite hefty with that premium matte finish that Lenovo uses on many of their other products. I mean, one look at the packaging and you might think you accidentally ordered a mini Legion Go, since seriously they're almost identical. It turns out that this ThinkSmart View actually lives up to its name, for viewing, since it's a pretty solid media player for movies or just listening to music. I like keeping it in its vertical orientation when listening to music, which has a punchy 10-watt speaker and gets quite loud. I've tested popular streaming apps like Amazon Prime, Netflix, and Max, and as long as you load it up with the right versions, which I will have linked in my description, you're good to go. I've actually kept the View at my side while I work, or even during my YouTube production, listening to music or streaming videos so I can catch up on my favorite shows and YouTube content. It's small enough to keep at your desk, but still has a decent sized display for content consumption. Now, longtime viewers know that for me, it's always about exploring the potential of emulation and pushing a device to its limit. The ThinkSmart View is no exception to this, and because we have Android in the backend and a decently powerful Snapdragon chipset, we can actually do quite a bit of emulation with the View. This was a lot of fun to explore, and given its unusual setup, we can do some interesting things with it. The View will have no issues with older platforms like NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and tons of other consoles. But let's take it up a notch, and things like PlayStation 1 with DuckStation is doing pretty well here. I've tested a good number of games running at 2x native resolution, and the ThinkSmart handles a lot of them quite well. A lot of my personal favorites like Einhander are running at this 2x resolution scaling, which helps clean up the visuals and looks great on a smaller display. Basically, this is a $30 device that runs PlayStation 1 better than many products double the price. The same can be said for Nintendo 64, which actually blew me away with its performance on here. I set the games to 1440 by 1080 and it was just an awesome experience. At this resolution, Nintendo 64 games looked fantastic, but most importantly, they ran really well. I mean, really, who wouldn't want to relive childhood moments like racing against a cheating penguin in Super Mario 64? Now, I did try out things like Dreamcast, Saturn, and some PlayStation Portable, but I don't think it fared as well. I do believe there's performance being left on the table here, but unless we see some serious community development for the unit, I don't think it will improve all that much. I'd say the absolute lightest of Saturn, Dreamcast, and PSP will be realistic. Now for me, the most exciting thing about the View is the ability to turn it over and have it stand vertically. First thought that comes to mind, of course, is playing Shmups in this orientation. Naturally, I load up a few of my favorites on Retroarch and got games like Batsugun, 1943, Vasara, and Truxin going. I even went as far as grabbing my trusty 8-bit Do arcade stick to turn the View into a mini vertical cab full of shmup goodness. There's a joy to seeing the View sit on my desk with an arcade game in demo mode, and really is just another way that the View makes for a great desk companion. But the arcade vertical fun doesn't stop there, and many of the games that make use of this orientation will be really great on here, so all of the awesome classics like Donkey Kong, Galaga, Centipede, and plenty more will make great use of the View's ability to stand up in this orientation. Finally, maybe a less obvious use would be the ability to play Nintendo DS games on here. Obviously, you're not going to be playing games that rely on the touchscreen, but there are actually a lot of great DS games that don't need touchscreen input at all. Nintendo DS seems to fare pretty well on here, and I did test some standouts that work without the touchscreen, so games like Advance Wars Dual Strike, Mario Kart DS, New Super Mario Bros., Contra 4, and a few others seem to be pretty solid. Given that we can set up the View in a vertical orientation, both screens can be displayed and essentially makes the View a desktop Nintendo DS. Now, as we know, we do have Android 8.1 running here, and despite Android Things being a stripped down version of Android, I have found a decent amount of success with native Android games. Now, it's definitely hit or miss as to what works, probably because of the older 8.1 ROM, but it's worth trying out what works, and that's always part of the fun. I did spend some time with this, as there are many worthwhile games that have been ported to Android and can run on lower spec hardware, such as the Snapdragon 624 in the View. I did test some of my personal favorite games, and I was pleasantly surprised with the results. I focused on games that have solid controller support, and of course, we really can't talk about Android gaming without showcasing some Horizon Chase, which does run very well on here, and again, without these native Android ports, we would just be limited to emulation. I continued to test a lot of my usual suspects, and was surprised to see the ones that did work fare better than expected. It's definitely a nice little bonus to see Shovel Knight, Pocket Dungeon, and Thumper running on here. Finally, in the realm of gaming usage, the ThinkSmart View does have a built-in 802.11 AC multiple in, multiple out connection, which actually makes it pretty decent for streaming. I did test a little bit of Moonlight with Sunshine from my local PC, and performance was solid. So, is this all too good to be true? Well, kind of. There's a reality to taking a product intended for one thing and making it do something else. In this case, we are very limited with the internal storage. The device has 8GB of eMMC and only about 3.25GB of usable storage after removing most of the junk, which means depending on your use case, you will either have to swap things in and out or get very picky about the library you're maintaining if you're using it for emulation and gaming. At this time, we don't seem to have any USB host support, so even if you wanted to plug in an external drive of some kind, it wouldn't work. We're also stuck with Android 8.1. And while not the biggest deal breaker, it just means we are limited depending on the app if it requires later Android support. For most of my viewers, the first thing that will probably come to mind is Switch emulation, and so that's not even a possibility here because it just won't work. Good news is that it's possible we will get a newer Android build in the future, as there are plenty of people in the community that are interested in this device, and many are actively working on this over at the RH Discord. Lots of great users there, including Deadman from XDA, have had success loading Android 11 onto the View. Personally, I have loaded 11 on there as a test, and so it's very possible that in the near future we will have something that is solid. Now, you might have noticed that I saved the setup process for the end of this video, and really that's because while I think the novelty of this for the price is very interesting, this is still something that I consider a tinkerer's special. As many know, I live for this kind of project, and I get a lot of joy out of seeing something intended for one thing be repurposed into something else. But as I mentioned earlier on, for the price and the small amount of effort, you can actually turn this into something pretty neat, and just looking at what's out there, you may even get your money's worth because to me, even if it's used as strictly a media device or a digital photo frame, it's already provided enough value to me and saves another piece of tech from ending up as complete e-waste. So thank you for joining me on this interesting journey. What do you think about the ThinkSmart View, and does its newfound usefulness intrigue you? Please stick around if you want to fully take your ThinkSmart View from business to gaming. First things first, the goal of this setup process is to get you to the point that you have removed the limited Teams functionality and are able to sideload your own APKs to expand on the View's possibilities. To start all of this, we need to first gain access to the View. Now, there is a USB-C port hidden away on this device. Lenovo thought that some rubber feet would be clever enough to hide it away, but simply removing it, and lo and behold, we have our access point. So before we begin to take this ThinkSmart View from business to gaming, we do need to get some software together on your computer to make all of this work. I have tested the following steps in both Windows 10 and Windows 11. The unit I have on hand has a newer firmware without any way to enable ADB, so we will need to flash an older firmware that allows us to enable this feature. So let's get all the downloads out of the way. I definitely recommend creating a folder where you can store the download to easily access them and help organize everything we need. First, I just want to thank Deadman from XDA, who has been helping us out over at the Retro Handles Discord. I recommend going to the XDA topics that I have linked in the description, as it contains a lot of useful information if you want to go beyond the steps presented here. So I went ahead and compiled all of the necessary files into a single zip. Just simply go to the link down in my description and download the ThinkSmart View zip that I put together, which contains all the files that you need for this process. The zip file contains 7 different items, which includes the ADB Fastboot++ installer, the Qualcomm drivers installer, the QPST installer, the firmware that we will be flashing to the view, 2 APK files, and the Firehose programmer for QFIL. Once you download the zip file, extract its contents to the folder that you created for this. So let's go ahead and run through a couple of installers, first starting with the Qualcomm drivers. Click on the QD Loader HS-USB driver 64-bit setup exe file and proceed with installation. Leave everything as default and click Next to continue to proceed through. You will need to restart your PC after it's been installed. So let's go ahead and do that. Once your PC comes back up, let's now head into the QPST folder, and in this folder you will find the QPST installer, which will install the Qualcomm tools that we need to flash the specific firmware. You might receive a prompt to install the VC++ 2013 package. Just click on Install to do that. The installer will do its thing, and then another prompt will come up. Click Next to continue through, then click I accept, and then Next. Click Next one more time, and one more time again, and finally install. Give it a few seconds and then the installer will complete. Click Finish once done, and let's now move to the next installer, which will be the ADB and Fastboot++ installer. As always, accept the agreement, click Next, and then one more time. Here you can choose to have desktop shortcuts, which I do recommend to make it easier to bring up the ADB command. Click Next, and then install. Okay, once finished, just uncheck the Open Toolkit and Launch ADB option, since we do have a few more things to do here. Click Finish to close the window. We are now ready to flash the specific firmware to our ThinkSmart View. We need to open up the QFIL tool, which can be found in your Start menu under QPST, and then click on QFIL. You can also just search for it and it will come up. With QFIL opened, things might look a little scary here, but I promise it's very straightforward. Go ahead and select Flat Build for the build type. Under Select Programmer, click on Browse and then navigate to your folder that has the extracted zip contents. Click on the Firehose programmer file in the folder which has the .mbn file extension. Now under Select Flat Build, click on Load XML. Navigate again to your folder with the extracted zip contents and select the CD-18781Y Teams and Others folder. Click on the Image folder, and then double-click on the raw program unsparse.xml, which will then prompt another window to select the patch file. You want to select the patch 0.xml. Okay, we are now back to the QFIL screen and are just about ready to send this over to our ThinkSmart View. So grab your view, make sure that it is unplugged from power, and get your USB Type-C cable plugged into the port and connected to your PC. Now here's the little tricky part. You will need to press down on both the volume up and down at the same time while plugging back in the power. It's a little tricky because of the barrel connector used here that can be a bit annoying to get back in. However, if you have done this step right, you should hear the usual noise on your Windows PC that something has been connected via USB. You will see a brief flash of the screen on the view, and after that nothing will be on screen on the view, but obviously it is powered on because Windows can see it. So in QFIL, click on Select Port. You should now see the Qualcomm HS-USB listed there if everything proceeded correctly with the driver install. Select OK, and now we are ready to flash. To start the process, just click on Download and then let the flasher tool do its thing. The flash tool will say download succeeded and finish download, which indicates that everything went correctly. After a successful install via QFIL, you will need to unplug the view to reboot it. Alright, plug the View back in, give it a few moments to start back up as the boot process is pretty slow. Your screen should look like this with the Microsoft Teams on display. Here we will go through the normal setup, including setting up Wi-Fi. You can skip the Bluetooth setup. Once you finish the initial setup, click on the gear icon, which will take you into device settings. From here, go to About, and then keep tapping on the firmware version to confirm that you have developer unlocked already. Okay, we are good to go now. So make sure your USB cable is still connected to the View, since we will be sending over some files to install so we can get out of the default Teams interface. Now before we start putting in commands here, go to the folder where you extracted everything and copy over the Home and Navigation Bar APK to the main ADB folder, usually under Program Files x86, and then under ADB and Fastboot++. Once the files have been copied over, we are now ready to open up the ADB and Fastboot++ command window. You can do this by clicking on the shortcut on the desktop or right from within the installed ADB folder and clicking on Open command.bat. So here is where we will enter a few commands to install the APKs. Open the Simple Ink launcher and then remove all of the unnecessary apps installed. In the ADB command window, type in the following command: ADB install home.apk. It will say performing streamed install, and once it's done, it will return to a new prompt. Now let's go ahead and install the Navigation Bar APK, which will be very useful to move around the interface by giving us the standard Android home, back, and multitasking buttons. To do this, type in the following command: ADB install navigationbar.apk. Hit enter and give it a second like before, and then we should return to a new command prompt. So once both APKs have been installed, we now want to remove all of the unnecessary programs and features on the View. Let's head on over to the XDA website, and in the topic created by Deadman, we want to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this first page, and then copy and paste this command into the window. Click enter, and then give it a moment to finish the process. You will get a prompt on your ThinkSmart View to select a launcher. Pick the Simple Ink launcher, and now your View should look like this. If you did not get a prompt, just type this command on screen into the ADB command window, or on the same XDA page, scroll all the way up, and under step 10, copy the code listed there. At this point, you can select Always Open with this launcher. So if you unplug and then plug your View back into power, it should be good to go, and no more Teams. It will look very clean as you see here. So you've done it, and amazingly, the easiest part of the process is to copy files over to install. To do that, just connect your USB cable like before and then go into Settings. Select Connected Devices, and then select Use USB to transfer files. Now for anything beyond this, like getting Magisk or any other advanced items, I recommend heading to the XDA topics or right on over to the Retro Handhelds Discord, which I will have linked down below as always. Here at RH Discord, we have very active discussions taking place right now about the ThinkSmart View, and there are lots of great and helpful users there to answer questions. So I hope this was helpful to get you going with your ThinkSmart View. I'd love to hear how you plan on using this if you have purchased one of these. As always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.